Howdy, howdy.
Hey,
Greetings. I'm
Hello,
Largo.
YouTube.
This is
hey,
Lair.
that
You know
that
these guys.
last that last slide of the intro was kind of me. Welcome. It was an older picture of me. My hair was a little different, but
That's
Self-portrait.
your Wilhelm in the morning before coffee.
yeah, that was pretty cool. That was a great intro.
Well, welcome, gentlemen. Thanks for joining me on this different take on our Beasties and Baddies run. We decided to go into the lore of DC Comics because there's plenty of Beasties and Baddies there. And we're focusing on the Monsters and Misfits of DC. And for this particular set, we're going to focus on some of the classic DC horror because there's some fun characters in this. Definitely misfits, definitely monsters. And as we all know, Goijitron is a big fan of the monsters. So I asked him to join us on this again. And Wilhelm is also a fan of the monsters.
Yeah, I really
So,
like them, and I would say I'm going to get a bit of an education today. So, based on what I've gleaned so far, there's a lot I'm really interested in, and you may send me down some rabbit holes because of this show.
oh boy, rabbit holes galore with this stuff. And
This is a
if you're
thick and meaty topic. Thick and meaty.
indeed, if you enjoy making red string diagrams of how things get connected, this is the show for you. No stone unturned, and many an hour of the night when I should have been in bed doing research on obscure characters that I was sure I'd never see again, but lo and behold, they show up here. Mm. So I'm guzzling energy drinks and trying to keep coherent. Let's roll. We decided to focus mostly on these big four. There's two houses that are very popular in DC horror: the House of Mystery and the House of Secrets. The Witching Hour was another horror anthology, and there's a lot of characters from that pop up elsewhere in the DC universe. And the Sandman. When Gaiman reinvented the Sandman, he borrowed a lot from previous DC characters. So we'll talk about that. But first, I thought we should start with just kind of a brief history of horror and mystery comics. And to start with that, I figured it'd be good to talk about the ages of comics. If you're a comic collector, and I know there are several out there who'll be watching, we generally go by gold, silver, bronze, and modern. But in the Overstreet Guide, they break it down even more because certain genres of comics came with pop culture, the ebb and flow of what was hot. And they break it up even more to delineate some of the different types of comics that were coming out. So if you see some odd ages you're not familiar with, like the Atomic Age or the Chrome Age, this comes from the way that Overstreet breaks things down, which I find kind of helpful. So all the way back in Victorian age, the 1800s, is where we kind of see the first prototype horror comic. And those, of course, are the Penny Dreadfuls. Some people know this from the TV show Penny Dreadful, but these were actual books, little chap books, very inexpensive, sometimes half a penny, sometimes a penny, hence the name. They had really gruesome illustrations, and they went anywhere from just an illustration on the cover and a text, or some of them had little pictures inside. Some of them were full-blown proto comic books. They had illustrations on almost every page, so it ran the gambit.
Somewhat of a precursor to the pulps we saw in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. Just
yes,
kind of cheap, gratuitous entertainment.
Yep.
Yeah, and these were throwaways. That just like the pulps, they were printed on cheap paper. They were just meant to be thrown out just when you read the newspaper and throw it out.
Yeah.
Some memorable characters have come from these, including Sweeney Todd, which some people may know from either the Johnny Depp film or the previous musicals. Varney the Vampire is a fun one. And one that we will be covering on our
Feast
sister show.
Blood. I love it.
Yes.
Blood. Yes. Fantastic.
Oh, they were very much into the melodrama.
Yeah.
On Retro Nuevo, we'll be covering another one of these called
Oh.
Spring Hill Jack.
This is a good one.
So that'll be coming up.
I cannot wait for that one. Yeah.
So
I'm intrigued.
definitely part of the lore of horror comics. But let's talk about the Golden Age real quick. Won't go into this too deep because that's a rabbit hole all its own. But as Goji alluded to, these were the pulps. These were, everybody and their brother was printing these, and there was no restrictions. Anything went, from drug use to decapitations to naughty bits and partial nudity, anything. So
always love a good decapitation.
Indeed.
There's always room for decapitation.
And they tried everything and anything. Like, they just opened a dictionary and they were like, every word in the dictionary, they're like, let's make something about it. Just make it creepy. Yeah.
Pretty much. There's a list here of some of the different titles. There were many, many, many more than I could fit on the slide. Many of these are now public domain, so you can find them for free at different websites if you want to read them. Some of the stories are good. Some of them are crap, but mileage will vary. Worth checking.
There's a lot of publishers out there doing public domain work. Like, it's not remastered or anything. They just get the original scans of the books and kind of print them. But it's a cheap and easy way to get these if you want a physical copy of it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, for those of you in the digital age, you can even find these now on DVD, where they've turned them into some of the other formats for reading, similar to like what Comixology does. So they're out there. Just do a little research and enjoy. One particular comic I wanted to point out was EC Comics. Though they are not related with DC at all, they were a precursor in many ways. A lot of the ideas that came from Tales of the Crypt, Vault of Horror, and Haunt of Fear, which was kind of their big three horror titles. They did other stuff, weird science and science fantasy. But for our purposes with horror comics, these are the ones that really stick out. Because one thing they did that was definitely a direct copy in further DC horror was to have hosts. And for Tales of the Crypt, of course, was the Crypt Keeper, who, many people know from the TV show that they did. The Vault Keeper was the host for Vault of Horror, and there was the Old Witch in The Haunt of Fear. And they did some really good stories. Stephen King, George Romero, a lot of guys who are known for their horror either cut their teeth writing these kinds of stories or reading these as they were growing up. So,
and presumably this is why they were horror hosts on the old midnight matinees and creature features like Elvira, Vampirus, Svengoolie. They kind of lifted that idea from the old EC Comics.
Absolutely. Definitely. That's where a lot of that was inspired. But let's go into the Atomic Age, because this is kind of where we see a lot of changes with horror. Was during this time in the late 40s and early 50s, mainly because of this jackhole, Dr. Frederick Wertham.
Good old Freddie Wertham.
What a jerk. He was a German-American psychologist, psychiatrist, one of the two or both. He was an egghead who thought comics were naughty and wanted everybody to believe like he did. So he wrote a series of articles. Two of the most notable were Horror in the Nursery and The Psychopathy of Comic Books, which was actually in the American Journal of Psychotherapy.
Wow.
So that started the fire. And of course, everybody's looking for the bugaboo of their era. Most of us grew up during the Satanic Panic era of, Dungeons and Dragons and heavy metal. But in the 40s, this was the thing. Comic books are bad, and all your kids are going to be delinquents and drunkards if they read that stuff.
They'll rot your mind. Yep.
It's funny. Comic books, rock and roll music, and video games are all terrible, but TikTok is okay? I don't think so.
Yeah. I was telling Jim this before we started the show. I think we were doing a little pre-show thing a week ago, just talking about this. And I brought up the exact point that there were congressional hearings about the content of comic books. There was congressional hearings about rock and roll, right? We covered that on one of the Infinite playlists where D. Snyder,
Oh, yes.
right, went and
God
set
bless
before
D.
Congress.
Snyder.
And
He did a great job.
you know, and then with the violent video games, and most of these did video games did the same thing where they self-regulated and, you know, kind of avoided that thing, and no one has ever come up. And is it just money? Because all these companies are paying like, why is like the stuff you see on TikTok, and it's even bled into Instagram and YouTube Shorts to some degree, but I would say TikTok's probably the biggest, you know, it's straight up just pornography, or just, you know, it's misinformation. It's really just, and most of those are people doing teasing things to get you to subscribe to their OnlyFans or whatever. But whether you subscribe to it or not, yeah, whether you subscribe to it or not, it shows up in your feed, you know. So I was telling Jim, you know, on Instagram nowadays, I'm like, it's like 6 degrees of separation. It's more like 3 degrees of boobies, or you know, something like these breastfeeding videos. Have you seen these where, like, sometimes I'm just like, I'll start with toy stuff and I'll scroll, and then there's like, they're using a fake baby and like showing you how to nurse, I guess, but it's just basically someone exposing themselves. it's crazy.
It's a tutorial, Will. It's all
Yeah.
good medical information. It's all legit.
I guess so. But it just seems that the moral decay was not caused by comic books or video games, or
It was TikTok.
It was TikTok. Yeah. So either we got old or things changed, or it's really, you know, modern social media has.
The more things change, the more things stay the same. And Wortham's seduction of the innocent was very inflammatory and got everybody up in arms. It was just basically saying everything's wrong with comic books. And
I think
even
this is
Congress,
a testament to, you know, you can have a title or a MD, or, you know, be a, you know, an expert in a field and be a complete bonehead.
Yeah. So he took what was, you know, a fairly lucrative publishing genre of horror and mystery books and set them on fire, pretty much. So Congress got involved. Everybody's worried about their darling little Johnny. Don't want him to be a delinquent. And
what
BC
about the
said,
children?
Yes. What about the children? After much consternation and fighting, they finally said, you know what? Enough. We're just going to print a comic that's just funny. And they did Mad Magazine, which was very successful, and lampooned a lot of the people from Congress who were causing them trouble. More than once, there were congressional members, senators, and even a few presidents that were lampooned in Mad Magazine. So they got a bit cheeky, but that's from EC. We definitely see some influence in some of the DC horror that we're going to talk about. Prior to some of the ones that, you know, Goji and I read as kids, there was a version of House of Mystery from the 50s. It was pretty much the same kind of stuff, but without some of the added goodies that we remember. There was no host at first. There was no actual House of Mystery. That was just the title of the comic. It was just an anthology of horror stories. Some were good, some, they were filler. But for the first few years, it did pretty well. And right up until issue number 35, and that was kind of the last of the good horror mystery stories in House of Mystery, because this is right before something happens in comics that most of us groan over. But 35 was the last good story. The Fatal Superstition is one of, I think, 3 or 4 stories that was in this compilation, where these guys come into a town that is very superstitious. They, of course, scoff at superstition and end up being killed by these series of unfortunate events that have to do with the superstitions that they ignored.
I like the featuring the man who haunted a ghost. They turned it around.
Yes,
I like that.
They did.
Yes.
So these were fun stories. A lot of these became like soup starters for larger ideas later on. and many a writer has dipped into these type of stories to borrow ideas for later horror movies and other things. But then the code, dun dun dun.
Yes.
Fun's
So
over, kids.
That's it. Out of those congressional hearings and stuff, basically the comics publishers all said, look, either they're going to regulate us or we're going to regulate ourselves. They created the what did they call themselves? The Comics Magazine Association of America. And out of that came the Comics Code Authority. So many of us saw this little stamp on the corner of our comics growing up. And that's why they basically nerfed all the stories. You can't talk about vampires. You can't talk about werewolves. You can't have anybody decapitated. No blood. Everybody's got to get along. Everybody's got to be a good, champion of democracy. Bad is bad. Bad guys can't be good guys. Cats can't live with dogs. I mean, it was very strict when it first came out. And
But you can kill Gwen Stacy all day long as you don't kill her with a werewolf.
That's right. So yeah, we got some weird stuff that came out of this because
absolutely ridiculous. Can you imagine a kid going up to, but mom, it's okay. It's approved by the Comics Code Authority.
Pretty much.
All right,
yeah.
son. Read
Oh,
away.
it must be okay. Yeah.
Oh boy.
So yeah, the comics that had the code stamp on them, basically there's pre-code and post-code. And pre-code was a lot more fun. So out of that, we got what I call the milquetoast mysteries.
Okay.
From issue 36 on for several years, the stories were basically Scooby Gang. It's like, oh, there's a monster, but it's not really a monster. It's a guy in a rubber mask. Oh, shucky darn. So they couldn't use anything that promoted supernatural or magic or anything. So they just did these kind of goofy stories. They were dumb.
Didn't you tell me about an extreme case where one of the writers' last names was Wolfman? And,
Marv Wolfman.
And he had to change his or use a pen name because they didn't want to print the word Wolfman.
They actually fought the code on that one because they were basically crediting him in a comic. I don't remember the exact details, but they went to the code and said, dude, it's his last name. It really is. Look on his driver's license. It says Marv Wolfman. And they fought and actually got it to put in, but then they had to put a little note. So really, this is a real person. It was silly.
So stupid.
But yeah, so House of Mystery and all the other horror comics pretty much got nerfed. Yeah. They were neutered for a long time. And then it got worse because we got the Silver Age. God bless them. Everything was spandex and goofy. So they said somewhere along the line, we don't know what to do with this title. We don't want to cancel it. Hey, the Martian Manhunter, he's a detective. Detectives solve mysteries. Let's stick him in House of Mystery. So we got the Martian Manhunter. Yeah, I love the Martian Manhunter, but these stories were not these were not his best hour at all. They were goofy. And as was the thing, you either got a goofy sidekick or you got a goofy pet. And he kind of got both at the same time. So whereas Batman had Robin, the Martian Manhunter had Zook.
Zook. Okay.
I blocked Zook from my memory until I saw his lights.
I'm so sorry. Didn't bring that trauma back. Zook was
my McFarlane Zook figure. That's what I want to know.
Oh, don't give Toddy Mac any ideas. The Todd Father will give you a Zook. Yeah. He's already given us the Aquaman equivalent. Anyway, this little naked orange dude is an alien imp who ran afoul of the Martian Manhunter and Detective Comics and ended up following him over to House of Mystery and became his buddy. And he's just as annoying as you would think from what he looks like.
Everybody needs a Zook.
Pesky partner.
Ironically, he does show up as an Easter egg in some other comic books as a stuffed animal. If you look in the background of some of the Young Justice comics or Teen Titans, it might have been. He's actually a stuffed animal on a shelf in one of the one of the superheroes girls rooms kind of thing. So
They actually did bring him back in the early 2000s just once in a Superman Batman story.
with
And
Batmite, maybe.
No, it was a story involving all the aliens on Earth attacking Batman and Superman, and it had something to do with Despero mind controlling them. And Zook showed up, and they acknowledged that he was the Martian Manhunter's old partner.
Nice. I'll have to read that one. I don't think I did,
Hmm.
but I give Zook a lot of crap, but he was a fun sidekick and actually saved the Manhunter on a few occasions. Another oddball that came out of House of Mystery, but actually were some fun stories, was Dial H for Hero. Some people may know this one, some people may not. But
This is new to me. Yeah, this is interesting.
The H dial has shown up in different places in the DC universe and has been reworked and reimagined a few times. I think it's even shown up in some cartoons, but I'd have to double check that.
And for the younger people at home, this was how you used to dial a telephone. And
yeah, we'll get into that.
Yeah, they integrated it with alien technology, so you would dial. Interesting.
Yep. So in the 60s, we got Dial H for Hero. He took over for the Manhunter. The Manhunter still showed up in Mystery, but usually as a background character.
It was great when Dial H for Hero became a big franchise with toys and cartoons and a movie. Of course, it was called Ben 10.
Yeah,
yep,
I was going to say this is
pretty
very
much the same thing.
Yeah,
it was
reminiscent of Ben 10.
Pretty much. If the guy who wrote Ben 10 didn't read Dial H for Hero as a kid, he missed an opportunity because it's pretty much one for one. Instead of the Omnitrix, you have the H dial, which, as Wilhelm has pointed out, looks much like what the old rotary phones look like. You would literally dial out HERO, and it would transform you into a random superhero. And that was kind of a vehicle for DC to allow their writers to just try out whatever goofy hero concept they had. And it's like, we're never going to write this as a full book, but if you want to stick him in Dial H for Hero, you can get 5 seconds with him when Robbie turns into him.
Yeah.
So Robbie Reed ended up getting the H dial. And when there was trouble, and there was always trouble around this poor kid, he would whip out the H dial and transform into a random hero and save the day.
Which, isn't in itself a bad idea. It's a good concept. A lot of fun ideas could be explored through it, but how does it fit in with horror? Or
it doesn't.
House of Mystery. Yeah, that's the
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the point. They just didn't know what to do with House of Mystery. I don't know why they didn't just cancel it and bring it back later when the code relaxed, but for some reason they chose not to. And they also decided to launch House of Secrets as a sister book, even though the code was definitely bearing down on them. These stories were also kind of mystery, kind of horror, but not really because they had to adhere to the code. They weren't great. And it went on for a while. And of course, they got into the spandex as well. So when they realized they couldn't really do justice to a horror story because of the code, they created their own characters. Mark Merlin was one of the early ones. He was kind of a trench coat noir detective type who also studied, got into investigating mystery stuff without actually getting into the supernatural. They later converted him to Prince Rawman, the Mind Master.
Oh,
one successful character that came out of this era of House of Secrets was Eclipso, who became a great villain under other writers. Originally, he was kind of goofy, but Rawman,
hero and villain in one man. Very cool.
Indeed. Yeah. It's a cool concept. And like I said, under other writers, he became a very interesting character.
Sort of a super villain version of Jekyll and Hyde.
Exactly. In spandex, originally. Purple. Yes, because purple is evil. Purple and green was evil. And red and blue was
half
good,
his face like much. Evil and half of it's good.
Right.
He's
eclipsed.
He's eclipsed. He's eclipse. Literally. he always had a permanent shadow. But Prince Ramen, like the noodles, no, raw man, raw as in the Egyptian.
I was going to say, I love
noodles.
his inexpensive yet delicious noodles.
Indeed.
Yes.
That would be funny if he like had
Yeah.
special ramen noodle powers.
Threw
But-
dried noodles at people.
He retired from the supernatural because he discovered this really inexpensive noodle.
Yeah, basically the Mark Merlin character was not selling comics. Doctor Strange was super popular over at Marvel. They wanted to create their own version, so they redid Mark Merlin and made him Prince Raw Man, the Mind
Yeah, he
Master.
kind of looks like a green Doctor Strange in that cover.
Oh, he was-
there.
Yeah, he was a total knockoff, but
Yeah.
he couldn't use magic, so he was a
Mm.
mentalist. He had mental
Ah.
powers. And the guy who wrote it was probably a little mental, but allegedly. So these two took over House of Secrets for a while, and the stories are really pretty much Silver Age goofiness. But Eclipso
Oh.
did get out of his own shadow, pardon the
Mhm.
pun. He became a great villain. And the idea of him being, Jekyll and Hyde, hero and villain one, is very much part of his mythos. A fellow by the name of Dr. Bruce Gordon. Yeah, they were real original with names. It's like, so somebody was reading Batman, saw Bruce Wayne and Commissioner Gordon, said, Bruce Gordon, that's a good name for another guy. Like,
Yeah.
anyway, so this guy, Bruce, finds this gem called the Heart of Darkness. And he is basically possessed by the spirit of this creature known as Eclipso. He has interesting powers over darkness. He can bring out the darker aspects of people's human nature. He later gained powers to possess and manipulate other people. So again, under other writers, he became a very interesting character and often beat the snot out of the Justice League. And
Okay.
Do you guys remember the event from the 90s, the Darkness Within, the Eclipso event? And
yes,
they released that gimmick cover that had the plastic gem glued to the cover.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I did not remember.
Oh,
that
it was a
one of the
thing.
more unique gimmick covers of the speculator period of the 90s.
DC loved their events and crossovers, and that was a fun one. Eclipso even shows up in some of the cartoons later, but we'll talk about him another time.
Yeah.
Let's delve into the Bronze Age, shall we?
Yes.
Things do look up in the Bronze Age because now we're into the 70s, and besides the hippies and the free love and the cool music, we finally got the House of Mystery back. During this time, two of my favorite characters in DC horror started showing up, Cain and Abel. And we'll be talking about them a lot because they show up all over the universe in many different ways. They were inspired by the biblical characters you would think of, the two brothers. And all through the 60s, they were everywhere. If it had to do with anything spooky or kooky, either Cain or Abel would pop up. And it all started.
Cain was rocking that haircut before Logan was.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, yeah.
He was unique. It all starts with House of Mystery 174. They basically said, you know what? This code is dumb. We're going to challenge it a lot. And Marvel did the same thing. They said, we just want to publish good stories. We're tired of everything having to be nerfed and made G-rated. And the code basically had no teeth. They realized they could publish whatever they wanted, and all they would get was a sternly written letter. So they said, okay, we'll just keep pushing the envelope and see how far we can go with this thing.
And that's a great cover, too. I love that cover. Come on
Oh,
in,
yeah.
kiddies. I've got candy and balloons.
And they put the kids there as just sort of a FU to the code. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
oh, yeah, okay.
Looks
we're
like the
back,
kid on the
baby.
left is thinking about it. Yeah, he's like, candy.
He's
Candy?
probably he's probably the only smart one that will survive. He'll send the other ones in and he'll just lay back. And
Is
wait.
it the fun size Snickers or the full ones? That's what he's asking.
Like, are you giving out fruit and toothbrushes or real candy?
Yeah.
But Yeah, this is where it all started to come back into the glory days of DC horror.
And this goes to show
So-
you that, like, when public outrage or something else was going on and people weren't worried about this anymore, they had moved on to something else. They were bitching about, whatever it was at the
Right.
time, that
Hippies. It was
it
all about
really
the
wasn't a
hippies.
big deal. Yeah.
Oh, the long-haired music. That's the problem now. Oh, comics can get away with whatever.
Yeah.
So here we finally start seeing the idea of the house as an actual character. So the House of Mystery is literally in the book House of Mystery. And it's not just any house. It is a haunted house, a strange, ethereal house. It's constantly changing. Pretty much you never see the same room twice. The house is kind of a quirky sense of decor. So it can be a bit confusing, especially if you're trying to find the bathroom. But it's definitely established that the house has a mind of its own. And of course, the house always wins. We don't know where it began. We just know that it's chock full of mystery. And most of those mysteries are, quite horrific.
Yeah.
And this is where we see our buddy Kane. He becomes the host and caretaker, the able caretaker of the House of Mystery. And he showed up in 174 and was pretty much there through the rest of the run. He also was kind of an homage to the EC storytellers of old, like the Crypt Keeper, but definitely had his own style. Definitely had the nice beatnik beard, the crazy hair. He was fun. And he was said to have a voice similar to that of Vincent Price. How they knew this from, you never hear him speak, but,
Sure.
it's a thing. Just go with it. We also get a buddy called Gregory, the gargoyle, who shows up here a little bit later in 182. He'd always had gargoyles and bats and other creepy critters hanging around him. But Gregory actually was one of the few that was named and became kind of his mascot, although he hung out more with Abel, as we'll see.
Yeah. And I find this surprising because, recently watching the Sandman Netflix series,
Mm-hmm.
these characters are in there. So, I thought they were original creations of that world. I didn't realize that Neil Gaiman had borrowed or, kind of even just kind of resurrected them from,
Don't skip ahead, Will.
well,
But yeah, we'll get
new
there.
to me. Yeah. But Gregory appears in the show and I didn't know where he came from.
Now you know. Spoilers. It came from the House of Mystery and the House of Secrets. One of the other really cool characters that came out of this new era of horror stories was Andrew Bennett from I, Empire. Marvel was killing it with House of Dracula and the whole Dracula and Blade and all that kind of stuff. And DC said, we want a piece of that. So they created this vampire who was a true 16th century vampire, but he only drank animal blood and he tried to help people out. And his ex-wife, Mary, the Queen of Blood, was the bad guy. So it was before the trope of bad vampire does good things, he was there.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it was a different take on it in that he turned his wife into a vampire, then regretted it and spent his eternal existence trying to stop her because she embraced it and became just totally evil.
Yeah, he was kind of like the vegetarian of vampires, and she's like, "Oh no, I like the taste of human blood." Mm-hmm. So yeah, it caused some strife in the marriage.
Yeah, sounds interesting though. Did you guys?
It is a good story.
Lot? Did you've checked this out or you've?
Yeah, it was.
I don't remember it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I read the reprint. They collected this whole story in a trade. So
great.
Yeah, another reason this was. Oh, I was going to say this is kind of odd. Was everything before this was just one-shot anthology stories.
Mm-hmm.
I, Vampire was the first time they did a long saga where they had a reoccurring storyline, and it ran pretty much for the rest of the book. So they wrapped it up with a bow. In House of Mystery 319, we got the final chapter, and we see the end of the story for Andrew Bennett, and he supposedly was demised, kaput, done. Somehow, as DC does, they resurrected him later on. Somehow, after, I don't know how you resurrect a vampire, but the same thing happens with Dracula and everybody else. They brought him back and they used him elsewhere in the DC universe. But this is a complete story. As Goji said, it has been collected. You can just get the original iVampire story and have a good read. Some things just can actually have the end and be done with. You don't have to have a sequel, but yeah.
Don't tell Hollywood.
Yeah,
I know. Abel actually showed up in DC Special before he showed up in his own comic book. There's a very short one-page splash that shows Cain and Abel talking about Abel becoming the caretaker of the House of Secrets. So he actually pops up here first, but very shortly after, I forgot. Yeah, Cain and Abel were based on real guys who worked for DC Comics.
Okay.
Writer Len Wein was Cain, and Mark Hannerfield, who was an assistant editor, was the inspiration for Abel. So they were buddies in real life, and they said, let's be immortalized as some kooky characters in horror comics. So, yeah. House of Secrets had been canceled 3 years prior, but when House of Mystery was revamped, they revamped House of Secrets shortly thereafter and brought in Cain. So you now have the two parallels. This is the first time we have the two houses, House of Mystery and House of Secrets. They're physically situated on two ends of a graveyard. The two brothers are, the bickering odd couple, and fun to watch, what they get up to. And they were played for laughs, so they came in and were kind of the humorous hosts. They'd have a few spots of doing something goofy, and then they'd get into the stories. But Abel took over the House of Secrets. The Gargoyle Gregory kind of migrated over and hung out with him a lot, but they bounced back and forth. What really helped House of Secrets was the artwork by Bernie Wrightson and Neil Adams. They did some beautiful work.
I was going to say that's a pretty nice cover with the kind of monster house looking, thing there. A concept developed long before we saw a, computer animated version in the.
You probably you can't point to a horror slasher film or pretty much anything from the 70s on that wasn't inspired by some of these stories in one way or another, especially the artwork. But we get to see Abel fleshed out. He was the portly one. His brother was the skinny one. And he was, pretty much the penultimate victim. He was always having tricks played on him by his brother. And he was played out as, kind of timid and stuttering. And he would even scare himself as he told stories sometimes, which was kind of funny. So, fun character. Here we see a typical example of what happens in these stories. Abel would do something to piss off Cain. Cain would torture his brother, and you would kind of walk in going, "Oh, I didn't see you there. Don't mind us." So
I'm just murdering my brother right here.
Yeah. So
pay no
if you
attention
did
to the
happen
man in the jar.
Exactly. If you happen to visit the houses, you might accidentally get picked up in one of Cain's traps that were meant for Abel. So be careful. It has been known to happen, and people disappear accidentally. One of the biggest things that came out of House of Secrets was Swamp Thing, but not maybe the Swamp Thing you know. So House of Secrets 92 is a famous cover. And a lot of people say, yep, that's the first Swamp Thing. And it is. But it's not Alec Holland. In this story, it's a different character named Alex Olsen. And later on, as we'll get into Swamp Thing lore in another video, we'll talk about the difference between the two.
Mhm.
But the original Swamp Thing showed up here, and that's who's on the cover, not Alec Holland. So it is the origin of Swamp Thing, but not the Swamp Thing you know. So
And
this
the
is
first
fun.
appearance of Swamp Thing came about only 2 months after the first appearance of Man Thing. Coincidence?
Hmm.
Most people think it is just a coincidence because of the short time span between the appearance of the two.
There's
Right.
a
It's
lot
like
of
these.
examples of that too, though, where
Oh, yeah.
where it's eerily close, like within months, or
There's a lot of crossover characters between DC and Marvel. It's kind of fun to go through. But when Len Wein was coming up with this idea, he didn't have a name for this character. So for weeks, people would ask him what he's working on. He's like, I'm working on the Swamp Thing. And that became the name. It just stuck. So that's why Swamp Thing is a Swamp Thing.
I like it.
And again, we will cover Swamp Thing in a different video because there's just too much lore all in its own. So we'll bring him back another time.
Yeah.
What do you guys think so far?
Very interesting. Yeah, a lot of stuff that I didn't realize, and going back and looking at anything from the past and things that may be forgotten to today's generation, you see the influences in modern, I'd say even things made in the 80s and 90s as we were growing up, how they were influenced from the prior generations. And I will say they also threw everything at the wall, and just the things that stuck are the things that lived on for generations. So in that sense, yes, they were just spinning a wheel, trying every idea, because we have Green Llama Man and all kinds of weird was a 6-gun gorilla, all kinds of things that are kind of in the public domain, and they tried everything. So yeah, in a sense, they were here first, so they got to just kind of try it all. And then if you come up with an original idea and it happens to be somewhat like that, that's fine. But yeah, so much is influenced from the things of the past. So many things, you read them and you're like, oh my god, this is where they got that from.
And it's
Pretty
always
much.
nice to look at things from Marvel and DC that aren't superheroes, because
Mhm.
people tend to forget that Marvel and DC and every comic book company covers every single genre of fiction that there is.
Yeah. There was even like just romance comics in the past. They haven't
Romance,
really lived
war,
on.
Western, science
Yeah, they did
fiction,
they did
everything.
every genre you could think of. And there was an audience for it because that entertainment came, it was cheap, easy entertainment. You walked by the newsstand on your way home from work, something caught your eye, you read it, and it only cost you a nickel, and most people threw them away.
Yeah.
It wasn't until our greedy generation that people started,
That's right.
connecting.
Death of Superman. I'm going to buy 50 of them and send my kids to college.
Yeah.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were very few people who collected these back in the day, and they usually lived in the basement, and mom would make them whatever they had before Hot Pockets. So,
Yeah.
but Goji, I know you've read a lot of these, at least the ones from the 70s. Have any of your favorites popped out? What did you think of Cain and Abel and some of the other wacky hosts?
They were fun characters. Yeah. Fun in the dynamic that one was
Yeah.
always trying to kill the other.
Yeah.
Can I ask you
And
something?
those are two other characters that need action figures of them. I'm surprised that DC
Yeah.
director
Yeah, right.
McFarlane has not done
Somebody.
figures of those. Those would be great to
Mhm.
put with your Universal monsters or any type of other horror type characters.
Did
Yes.
these stories or the compilations or anthologies, do you see any examples of, because did they rotate writers through these, or was it usually one writing and one artist that handled it for a run like they do in modern comics? Would you see someone who
Generally,
maybe
yeah.
became popular later on who like cut their teeth in writing some of these?
Oh, absolutely. Writers, artists, illustrators, all of them started out in what they call the bullpen. So they had just a group of talent, mostly underpaid, some of them desperate to be noticed. And out of that, we got people like, Neil Adams, like
Okay.
Michael Kaluta. I'm trying to think of some other names off the top of my head. Pretty much all the stars that we know of: Marv Wolfman, Jim Starlin, Steve Ditko. Anybody named that you can think of that's related to comics started out in one of these bullpens and worked their way up. So yeah,
House of Mystery had a murderer's row of talent, like legends like Al Williamson and Wally Wood and guys like that worked on those.
Yep.
And of course, with
And
Marvel
they would-
and DC, always the anthology titles were always the tryout books.
Yes.
We got a lot of the most famous superheroes didn't start out in their own comics. They started out in Amazing Fantasy or Journey into Mystery or Tales of Suspense, things like that. These were the equivalents of the horror characters.
DC Presents was another one.
Yeah.
Where they,
Brave and the Bold.
And I like that,
Showcase.
Not every story is going to be a hit because they're giving you a lot, and trying things. It's a sampling. So, some of the things did go on to get their own titles and become legendary as it would be. But
indeed.
Yeah, very cool.
And part of that hubris of throwing everything at the wall, we'll get into when we start talking about the implosion. But yeah, a lot of those starving artists who were getting noticed cut their teeth here. Like I said, Neil Adams, Bernie Wrightson's another good one. Kaluta, beautiful cover work, good interiors. They really understood doing sequential art.
Yeah.
And
of course, back in those days, there were no contracts. There was no health insurance. You had to hustle. You had to get the job and pay the rent.
That's right. So, and covers sold books. So, they really had to put it in. Nowadays, covers are, hey, we're going to do 7 covers so people will buy 7 copies.
There were no alternate covers and all that. That came later. But
they really
a lot of
put
these
the work in on these. I mean,
absolutely. They did a lot of, and these were true artists and writers in the most true sense. And
but they weren't taken
underpaid.
seriously outside of the industry, right? So like a lot of these were so talented, and we look back and we notice that, but other illustrators would look down on them. You're at a fancy dinner party, you work on those comics, the rags.
And yeah, because of that, many of them used a pseudonym or a nom de plume, either in comics or when they did other work for advertising agencies or magazines. They would use a different name so they weren't associated with their comic work. So,
most famously, Stan Lee, Stanley Lieber, he wanted to save his name for writing the great American novel, which he never wrote.
No. And that's where we got Stan Lee. Another great book. That's right. It's The Witching Hour. Again, all of these were very similar in what was interiors. They were just anthologies of horror stories, and no real rhyme or reason to the stories. There wasn't a lot of continuity. It was just fun stories, one-shots. The only continuity was the host. And in the case of Witching Hour, we find the trio of witches known as the Kindly Ones: Cynthia, Mildred, and Mordred. And if that sounds familiar, it's because they will show up later. They were pretty much based on the witches in Macbeth that tell the story and are related with the fates of people. And the 3 witches would often pop in on other people's stories. So they'd show up with Cain at the House of Mystery, or they'd show up with Abel at the House of Secrets. They kind of went back and forth. One thing that the witches were known for in their book is they loved to do storytelling contests, and some poor soul would get pulled off the street to judge which of the 3 did the best story, and the other 2 would torture whoever they didn't pick.
Oh boy.
There was no winner.
There's no winner.
But that was fun. And those are the characters that really stuck out more than the stories they were presenting. And have room, will travel. They got around. Witching Hour eventually got caught up in the DC implosion, and their book was canceled. So they started showing up more and more in House of Mystery and House of Secrets. They showed up so much in another book, the Unexpected, and another title we'll talk about in a minute, they basically bumped the regular host of that out of his slot and took over because they were more popular.
Now, do you think that whoever created the film Hocus Pocus was a fan of this comic? Because I look at
Yeah.
these and I see the Sanderson sisters.
Exactly. Very much, the maiden, the mother, the crone idea. Yeah, they captured it here. So yeah, they're all over the place in pop culture. So one of the other hosts that I wasn't really aware of, but was very popular, was Eve, of course, the biblical mother of Cain and Abel. She got a book called originally the Sinister House of Secret Love, which was a horror romance title. But basically, yeah, after 4 issues, they said that's dumb, and they just started calling it Secrets of Sinister House. So Sinister House, like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, was a house, and she lived there. And occasionally Cain and Abel would come over and she'd scold them for being dumb kids. And she had a thing for ravens, which will also come up later. So this was Eve. How beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Originally she was a witch, and typical witch-like behavior. She was somehow really, really popular with the readers, though. So much so that in Weird Mystery Tales, another book of horror anthologies, Destiny had been the host of that book, and she would pop in there, and eventually she took over, and Destiny was unemployed. So go figure.
Yeah.
But
it's time for
she
me
was
to tell my first grisly shocker. That's a great way to tell a
and
story.
her cackle. Yeah, she was a fun one. The Weird Mystery Tales is another one of those. There's a bunch of these titles, and some lived, some died horrible deaths after a couple of issues, but they all did the same thing. They were anthology horror comics.
Did any of these, and now with these archives and people tracking these, you see reruns of old stories or kind of retreads of old stories? That's nothing new, right? They probably to pump.
Yeah, they would reprint. DC also had something called Blue Label, where it was just total reprints of earlier comics. So yeah, they would recycle stuff. Marvel did that too with X-Men and some of the other titles. They would have whole series of books that were just reruns because hey, just trying to sell stories. If you missed it the first time, there was no internet back then. If you didn't catch a reprint, or because again, these were meant to be throwaways. People weren't collecting them.
That was a great way to catch up on continuity back then, before trade paperbacks and everything else. The reprint titles were a gold mine.
Tales of the Teen Titans was one I used to read because of that. They would reprint a lot of the early stories that I'd never read. Here's Destiny. Again, he was a host in Weird Mystery Tales. He carried the Book of Souls, which later became known as the Book of Destiny. And Marv Wolfman of Teen Titans fame and X-Men and many other things was one of the creators of him, along with Bernie Wrightson. Interesting character. Even though he was kind of booted by Eve, he did become popular in another set of stories that we'll talk about later. But he lived in a place called the Garden of Forking Ways. So every time you made a decision, there was another fork in the road. Destiny was chronicling it in his Book of Souls. Another one of those oddball ones. This is a blink and you'll miss it kind of thing. 15 issues. The Forbidden Tales of Dark Mansion. And this one was kind of more gothic. So it had more like the Hammer horror kind of flavor to it. That was kind of its only differentiating thing compared to some of the other anthology stories. Didn't sell well, didn't survive. But I did want to mention it just because it fits with all the other stuff we're doing. And then there was Plop.
I remember this cover.
Oh, man.
Bizarre.
Bizarre is a nice way to put it. Plop was just one of those things. If you're seeing the spinner rack at the 7-Eleven and you saw this
Yeah.
cover, you're like, what the? It's as weird as you think it is. It was a horror comedy kind of book. Stories were goofy. What was his name? Basil Wolvington was one of the main
Wolverton.
artists.
Mhm.
Wolverton, thank you. And yeah, he did all kinds of crazy stuff. So this was an anything goes. It was kind of DC's answer to, I think, Mad Magazine is probably the closest related to it. A lot of parodies, a lot of hijinks, and Cain, Abel, and Eve would show up and host. So that's why I mentioned it. So, like Will said, if there was a kitchen sink to throw, yeah, DC would do it.
Mhm. Another
So-
publisher that did a lot of those mystery comics back in the 70s was Charlton.
Yes.
Maybe
Oh, yeah.
at some point in the far future, when we're done with all these Marvel and DC topics, we can talk about Charlton comics.
That would be fun, especially some of the crossover ones like Blue Beetle, Question. Yeah, there's a lot of Charlton characters that you think of now as DC, but they had their start in another publication before the big corporate entity gobbled them up.
Mhm.
So let's talk about this, because if you know comics, you know what this is. If you don't, you probably don't. Would you care to take a stab at what the DC implosion was, Will? Were you aware of this in the
I
late
was
70s?
not aware that this happened, but I can imagine they just spread their hands too far too quick, and as a matter of fact, everything just imploded, and
That's
just-
it. Exactly.
Too much.
So in 1978, DC was getting their butt kicked by Marvel. Marvel had Spidey. They had, the Incredible Hulk was huge on television. They had all kinds of great titles that were totally outselling DC. X-Men was big, becoming big. They got bigger in the 80s, but a lot of the Marvel stuff was really moving and DC was hurting. So they said, hey, we'll do a marketing campaign. We'll call it the DC Explosion, and we'll put out a whole bunch of new titles and new characters, and we'll make a ton of money. And they didn't. Not at all. So most of these new titles got maybe 5 issues and were canceled because DC almost went bankrupt over this.
Wow.
It was a flop. And the sad thing is some of the comics were really good, but the management at the time panicked and just said, pull the plug on everything. We'll just figure it out later.
Mhm.
So many casualties of this.
Firestorm, Black Lightning,
Firestorm.
Batman
Yep.
Family. What were some of the others? Oh, Steel, who is now known as Commander Steel.
Right.
And a bunch
Not,
of the titles
not
we're talking about
the
today.
not the Shaquille O'Neal horrible
Right.
version, a different Steel. But
Mhm.
yeah, there were a lot of cool characters that came out of this. Did get picked up later on in other titles, but yeah, the implosion was bad. One of the few horror books that survived the implosion was Secrets of Haunted House. Yet another house. This one was hosted by the usual gang of idiots: Cain, Abel, Eve, Destiny. All of the different hosts kind of showed up in this book because some of them were now homeless because they're canceled. Their titles have been canceled. But this one had kind of a weird publication because it didn't come out every month like most comics did at the time. It had a run of 46 issues, but between 5 and 6 and between 14 and 15, there were just gaps where it didn't publish for many months because reasons. Yeah, it was just kind of an odd one, but it kept on trucking. And the only real noticeable character other than the host that came out of Haunted House was Mr. E. Very interesting character.
Mhm.
Kind of an anti-hero before there was such a thing. He was a menace. He was mentally unstable. He was literally cuckoo. But even though he was blind, he could see evil. And
Interesting.
you weren't sure if that was a mystical ability like Daredevil being able to have his sonar, or if the guy was just nuts. The jury was out. But
He was obviously
stories-
blind because everyone knows if you're going to bash someone over the head with a hammer, don't wear a white suit.
That's right. Especially after Labor Day, or is it before Labor Day? I always get that messed up. But yeah, he's a fun character. He will come up again in one of our other shows when we talk about some of the wacky detectives of Detective Comics, because he is an investigator. But this is where he showed up first, was in Haunted House. Another blink and you'll miss it was Tales of Ghost Castle. Only 3 issues for this one. But it is worth mentioning because the host and the castle show up elsewhere and are very prominent elsewhere in comics much later.
Look at that cover. Are those skeletal hands growing out of a mushroom? Interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because a soul a day keeps the devil away.
That's what you see when you eat the mushroom.
I guess.
The 70s. What a wonderful time. So, yes, he was growing some funky mushrooms down in the basement. And you'll leave your imagination to where that goes. This is Lucian. And he will show up much, much later in the 80s and 90s and become a prominent character in the DC universe. But here he was a humble storyteller who lived in a castle called Ghost Castle, somewhere in Transylvania, had a pet werewolf named Rover, and he's kind of interesting. He will show up when we start talking about the Sandman. Another victim of the implosion was Doorway to Nightmare. Only got 5 issues, but it did give us Madame Xanadu. Not the song or the movie from Olivia Newton-John, but the fortune teller who uses the tarot to tell you the fate of your story. And she was very thick with the plot armor. She was able to, oh, look at what I just uncovered that will help our main protagonist figure out where he's going in this story. How convenient.
Okay.
But she is an interesting character.
Never heard of a lot of these characters. Yeah, it's very interesting.
They are kind of, with what we like to do with Beasties and Baddies, we look for some of the oddballs. She shows up in a lot of different corners of the magical world of the DC universe. She is actually Nimue from the Arthonian legend. She is the sister of Morgan Le Fay and has been around at least since Camelot. She shows up with every magic-based superhero at one time or another, be it the Demon Knights, Justice League, Dark, Spirit Squad. If there's a team, she's probably helped them out one time or another. So we'll
She's
come
like
back
Oracle.
to her.
She's like
Yes.
Oracle for magic users.
Yep. Exactly.
She's like Madam Web.
Kinda. Yeah.
Or her lesser known.
Not the horrible. Yeah. Not the horrible movie.
Ma Ouija. Who uses a
Oh.
Ouija board to, I don't know.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was a Ouija board post somewhere. Not that I've uncovered, but I'm sure it's out there. So The Unexpected was kind of a catch-all. Started life as Tales of the Unexpected. Was more of a sci-fi book. But after the implosion, they had all these other stories that didn't have a place to go because those books had been scrubbed. So they said, let's take over and call it just The Unexpected. And we'll just shove all those stories in this book. So House of Secrets, Witching Hour, Doorway to Nightmare, and a sci-fi book called Time Warp. All of those stories that had been written, but their books had been canceled, showed up here.
I think we need to go through these stories and check them against M. Night Shyamalan and see if he stole any of these unexpected twists from this comic.
That would definitely probably
Right?
be accurate. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Let's just say there are some really good, interesting writers, and there are some hacks who just read comics and copied them. So I won't say who's who, but this one kind of chapped my hide as a young comic reader. This was the end, which was kind of an insult to injury for the beloved House of Mystery. I didn't like this story, made me mad when I read it as a kid, but in '83 they canceled House of Mystery. Sales weren't great. They weren't doing real well with horror stuff. Everything was leaning more towards superheroes.
Mhm.
And for some reason, they thought it would be funny to do a meta fictional tale where they break the fourth wall. So
Oh.
Kane comes back to the House of Mystery after torturing his brother and finds a for sale sign. Joe Orlando and Karen Berger, who were real life editors, writers. I think one of them was even VP at that time
The
of DC
Condo
Comics.
of Fun instead of the
Yep.
House of Mystery.
Hey, it's the 80s, man. This is the time of excess and
Boo.
yeah.
Boo.
So they
Oh,
literally, in the comic book, demolish the House of Mystery and start building the Condo of Fun. And
oh.
poor Kane is homeless. Fortunately, during the crisis, the house mystically reappears. But it was a dark time.
That's painful just hearing about it. I could definitely understand how you felt reading it.
I was mad.
Oof.
But they do, Kane and Abel do find some cameos in other books, including Swamp Thing, which makes sense. This obviously is a homage cover to the first appearance of the original Swamp Thing. And Kane and Abel show up in this really interesting story in issue 33. This was during the Alan Moore era. Alan Moore did some beautiful Swamp Thing stories, really deep stuff, very adult themes. And in this particular story, Swampy's girlfriend, at this time, she went through a couple of name changes. She was known as Abby Cable at this time. She's also been known as Abigail Arcane and about 6 other names. She's been married and had a couple different surnames, but that's, a rabbit hole for another time. But in Swamp Thing Volume 2, the Moore era, Cain and Abel come to Abby in a dream and basically try to warn her about something really bad that's going to happen to Swamp Thing. And this starts a struggle between the two brothers because, of course, Cain being, the one who believes that you should keep things a mystery, Abel being the one who is the possessor of secrets. Cain tries to let a secret out to Abby to tell Swampy about the original Swamp Thing, Alex Olson, and something that's going on with Alec Holland. And Cain's not having it. He's like, you don't share these secrets. They go to the grave. So, of course, he kills Abel. And Swampy doesn't get the message. But interesting story and a great use of the two characters in a place you don't expect them to pop up. So it was the whole story was a dream sequence, but it had real effects in the Swamp Thing comic book. So kind of trippy.
Yeah.
I liked it.
That's something to look up. I think I'd probably like that run.
It's worth a read. Yeah, and it's been reprinted in a couple of other collections of Swamp Thing stories. But the Copper Age is where we are now. And again, they started running out of metal, so we got the Copper Age.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it seems to be, not getting better.
No, it's getting worse.
Yeah, it's getting worse.
We haven't yet reached the cubic zirconium age. That's coming.
That's coming. Yeah. The mid 80s, early 90s were not a great time for comics, depending on where you stood on things and what you liked. The one shining light out of this was probably the Crisis. And this, for a lot of people, this was a delineation between the Bronze Age and the modern age, or like we're talking about here, what we call the Copper Age. This was the big event that changed DC Comics, changed their continuity. A lot of characters died. A lot of them got retrofitted or had their histories changed. So this is kind of the point where things go sideways, such as House of Mystery's back, but now Elvira's running the show. Kane has disappeared. We don't know where he is at this point. This was a fun run. Again, it's the typical fare of horror stories with the cheeky Elvira stories. Very much mirrored what she did as a host for some of the old cheesy Saturday monster specials when she did her TV show.
And they definitely capitalized on that, putting her on the cover.
Oh yeah, it was fun. You know, I was a little salty that my beloved Kane wasn't in the book, or when he was talked about in the book, she was making fun of him.
Oh,
She was mean. She was very mean to Kane. But since Kane was always mean to Abel, it was kind of, he was getting some comeuppance because she wasn't having it. You know, you don't mess with Elvira. But the house seems to love having a caretaker. And who wouldn't want her to be the caretaker? I mean, I'm sure she does a wonderful job of, you know, light dusting and, you know, all the other things you need in a house.
And she had plenty of previous experience as a host.
That's true. She fit.
Good resume.
Oddly enough, of all the places in the DC universe for these guys to pop up, they showed up in Blue Devil. Blue Devil was kind of a science fiction slash. He got into magic later, but started out as a comedy book. You know, he was kind of a goofy character. He wanted to be a hero. He also wanted to be an actor. He was a stunt man. Most of his stories is about him trying to get work as an actor.
Yeah, this comic, it says ear-splitting music, extra-dimensional monsters, plenty of snacks. Okay.
Got to have snacks. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the guy writing this at the time was the same guy who brought us, you know, the buddy cop stories of Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, Lobo, those kind of characters. So it's that kind of goofiness. And
Blue Devil doesn't get enough love in the extended media. I think he had one line of dialogue in all of Justice League Unlimited.
Yep.
And they were going to develop him in the last Swamp Thing series, the one that got canceled. He appeared right at the tail end of that. Yeah.
He's a fun character, and he has actually gotten an action figure or two. And so he's out there. We'll talk about him again in another show because he's worth talking about. He's a fun character.
He looks like a more cartoonish Hellboy, maybe was I don't know, you know, he looks like.
Yeah, this was definitely prior to Hellboy, but very much same kind of vibes. If you like, you know, the comedy horror bit. He gets into it later. Since the House of Mystery was no more, in Blue Devil, Kane takes over the House of Weirdness, and weirdness did ensue. Matter of fact, in this particular comic, they're dealing with the ghost of a rock, you know, like a heavy metal rock guy. Who shows up and starts menacing people, and he's pretty terrible musician even in the afterlife. So, but they showed up. Finally, in the very last issue of House of Mystery under Elvira, Kane shows back up, and he is emotionally scarred. he's talking about his adventures. He showed up someplace, and there was this swamp monster, and he actually killed Abel, and there was this Blue Devil, and there was this House of Weirdness. He doesn't quite remember exactly where he's been, but yeah, he needed therapy. It was fun. So yeah, the Copper Age.
Yeah, so they moved more to it was like horror, but like comedy also, like comedy horror, which, you know, a lot of the 80s movies kind of were also over the top and almost funnier than they were scary. You know,
there was a lot of zaniness at DC at that point. We had Justice League International. There was a lot of comedy in that. Just some goofy stuff going on. It's like they didn't really know what to do with a lot of characters after the Crisis. They were trying some different things, and then things got dark.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Another name for the Copper Age is the Dark Age, because mature content became very popular and
grim and gritty.
Yes. Yeah. And the two most notorious comics who were the best selling were Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, and Watchmen. And those kind of set the tone. Even though those were stories that were not in DC continuity, a lot of the dark themes bled into the DC continuity. A lot of characters started getting grim and mean, and it was a thing. Oh yeah. And out of that, one of those mature themes was the Sandman. This was an interesting one. And this is where it all comes together and why this video is so long, because there's a lot of tie-ins. Let me count the ways. So The Sandman was a horror fantasy comic written by Neil Gaiman, as most people know. The original run was 75 issues. Of course, there were other series that came after, but that first 75 issues set the tone and were really neat. So
Yeah.
I recommend, if you want to read Sandman, pick this up. It is the first collected volume. It's called Preludes and Nocturnes. And it is a complete story. If you just read this, you don't have to read anything else. It tells the whole story, basically, that was the Netflix TV show came from this, including his sister death. The whole story of how he gets his items together. It was kind of an item fetch it quest that he went on in the comics. They mirrored that in the TV show as well. But this is where it all starts.
Yeah,
And
it's one of my regrets because like when I first saw this on like the, my close to my town got its like first comic shop when like this was coming out, and I saw it on the shelves, but I was like, it's too emo. I was into the Punisher at the time, or Wolverine, and that was it. That's all I read.
Grim and gritty. You were the problem.
Yeah, I was the problem. And
when everybody else was writing, those types of tales, Gaiman took a different direction. He had a very different sensibility. He was actually headhunted from, a talented pool of English writers like Alan Moore, was brought over to.
I think,
Uh-oh.
I think Jim froze.
Watermelon Gremlins.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jim was going to reference how DC Vertigo, I think Karen Berger in particular, who was heading up Vertigo at the time, went over to the UK and poached a lot of talent. I remember seeing an interview with someone from 2000 AD, the long-running British comic. I think it was John Wagner, who was complaining about how DC had gone over there and poached all the best artists and writers for the US.
Right. Sorry, guys. I had a little power brownout for a second.
Oh, yeah. No.
It was either that or the ghost of Eduardo. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, it's a regret because I've come to really enjoy some of Neil Gaiman's storytelling. And,
he does some good stuff. Right off the bat, one of the reasons we talk about EC is because Gaiman was a huge EC fan. And a lot of what he did with the Sandman character was directly inspired from the EC comics he read as a lad. So in many an interview, he talks about his love for EC comics, and you definitely see that in some of the stories. He took over from a very interesting character. The Sandman by Simon and Kirby of Captain America fame and Fourth World and all that good stuff. Their version of the Sandman was very, very different. He was, a typical Kirby type, larger than life hero. He had sand powers. He had some kind of dream powers. It was weird and wacky and very Kirby.
Yeah. They pay homage to that costume in the TV, the Netflix series. And
there's a little cameo.
I just got the reference now. Yeah.
That's where it comes from, is the Kirby era. But they also pay homage to the Golden Age Sandman that was reinterpreted by the character in the JSA. Later on, he shows up there. So these two Sandman characters existed in the DC universe simultaneously. So there are even times where Wesley Dodds Sandman and Morpheus the Dream Lord's Sandman will interact. So it's cool. But he definitely took inspiration from both of these characters when he created his version of Sandman, otherwise known as Morpheus. The helm of office, his weird kind of helmet that you'll see in the comics and in the TV show, was inspired by Wesley Dodds' Sandman gas mask. And his gem, the Dreamstone, was directly lifted from Dr. Destiny, who was a villain in DC Comics long before this version of Sandman was created. So, and the use of sand and dream came from the
Yeah.
Kirby Sandman.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of, his inspiration was from a lot of these characters, but he really did a good job of weaving them into a new kind of mythology or narrative, right? Like, it's not just
Oh yeah,
poaching from these things. He took these, like, kind of just dormant characters and breathed new life into them.
yeah. I would say it was like a love letter to
Mm-hmm.
classic DC horror. He took all these great characters and reimagined them in ways that fit, and made
Mhm.
them in some ways better, or at least better utilized than they had originally been.
Sure.
Carl, were you ever into the Sandman stories? Did you get into that kind of stuff?
I did not. No, I
So,
never read the Gaiman run actually, but I do want
okay.
to check out the TV show and see what that's all about because
Yeah.
Gaiman was an executive producer on that show. He did develop the show, and I think you watched it and said it was very much like the comic, and that's
It
probably
really
why
is.
it's so faithful.
It's really good. I'm not a huge fan of some of the adaptations Netflix has put out. This
Mhm.
one is good.
It's pretty
But,
solid. Yeah.
yeah, Destiny, who we saw earlier, pops in here. Now we see him as one of the Endless. He is the elder brother of Dream. All of the Endless start with a D. So there's Dream, Destiny, Death, who shows up, Destruction, Delirium, Desire. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but they're all parts of the family. So
Daffy.
Daffy, I think he's in there too with bugs, but I don't know. So we see from Weird Mystery, Destiny finds his way into the Dreaming, which is the realm of Morpheus, and shows up in a lot of the stories. And he's really well done. He's basically the same character, still has his Book of Destiny, has the same role that he had in the previous horror comics, but it's been more expanded. You get to know more about him. Lucian, remember that funny guy with the pet werewolf? Well, here he is again. He is the librarian of the Dreaming. Turns out that he is the right-hand man of Morpheus, the Sandman, and his abode, his castle, was the palace of Dream. So, just like with the House of Mystery and the House of Secrets, they have existing places in the real world or the DC universe, and then there's the dreaming versions, and they're connected. So, Ghost Castle, wherever it is in Transylvania, is literally the Palace of Dreams in the Sandman's realm. And Lucian is the librarian and is in charge of every story ever written. So it's pretty cool. I like the way that they brought that character in and kind of expanded his lore and made him fit. And Gaiman writes him really well. He's a very interesting character, and he's not afraid to argue with his boss when the boss does something dumb, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
You can tell
So-
when the writer is a fan of the comics when they do stuff like that, when they pull obscure characters from obscure titles and reinvent them and fit them into the current narrative.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this guy hadn't been seen since the mid 70s, and most people didn't know who he was unless you were a diehard horror fan. It's like, ooh, I know that guy.
Yeah, I'm getting blown away by all of these,
Yeah.
characters that I've seen iterations of, or just from the Netflix special. And there's
Yep.
a deep
Matthew.
rich history to all of them.
Matthew the Raven. He's a prominent character in the TV show. Started out as Matthew Cable, who was a operative, some sort of secret agent for the government, and he was in the Swamp Thing comics as a
Interesting.
person before he became
Yeah.
a Raven. So all of these are homages or Easter eggs from previous characters. Gaiman loved using older characters. And of course, my beloved Cain and Abel are very much all over the Dreaming. And their roles are also kind of expanded, and they fit really well because they're storytellers, and Dream is all about stories or nightmares. And in Neil Gaiman's Sandman, Cain and Abel have both of their houses, and their houses have equivalents in the dreaming, and they have responsibilities. I did not realize this until I was looking into this. Gaiman took this idea from one obscure passage in the Bible where it talked about Cain after he killed Abel and got the mark of Cain. He was sent to dwell in the land of Nod. The land of Nod,
Yeah.
kind of a, reference to dream. So from that, he created all this. And so the big thing between these two is, again, a mystery can be shared, but a secret must be forgotten. So that was kind of the premise. That was one, and they created that as more of the idea of why these two brothers are always quarreling. One is, responsible for keeping secrets. The other one is investigating mysteries. So it's a thing. Ma shows up. So Lucian was actually in the Sandman universe the first Raven. He was the Raven that was sent out by Noah and didn't come back. Cheeky bugger, The dove got all the credit for finding the olive branch, telling him to come out of the ark. But he was a buddy of Eve's. And so when they go into the dream world, he, of course, gets to be the librarian. But Eve and her husband and her kids, Cain and Abel, and some others, are brought into the dreaming and are given representations of different stories and tales. So basically, everybody that's in the dreaming is a story version come to life for whatever story they're from. And this is, we see the differences between the two houses. That's very much a thing. There's a physical manifestation in our world or the DC universe, and then there's the dream version of each of these houses. So they'll pop up now and then. And in the Sandman's first tale under Gaiman, Cain and Abel really come to his rescue. He's been in rough shape, and so they help him to get back into the dreaming through the House of Secrets. You can see Gregory, our favorite gargoyle, carrying him because he's in pretty rough shape, and they nurse him back to health. And this is where we get the modern interpretation of these two characters. The idea that they're mostly in the dreaming. They are story versions of themselves. They are in an endless cycle of, one being killed by the other, and it rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Yep. So another fun character that pops up in Sandman is Goldie, another gargoyle. He's featured in the TV show version, but started out in Sandman comics. And pretty much the story is beat for beat. What came in the comics is what shows up in the show. So it's very cool.
Why aren't there more Goldie toys? He's adorable.
He is adorable.
He could be the next Grogu.
Oh, better than Grogu. And of course, the kindly ones show up in the dreaming as well. And they make a lot of sense because of their connection with fate and how one moves through your life and the stories that they're involved with. Like I said, they are alluded to in Macbeth with Shakespeare. They're alluded to in Greek mythology. So they've been around a while. And Dream is actually a little afraid of them because they can mess with him.
Yeah, and they're very confusing. Speaking to them is very confusing.
Kind of riddle-ish, kind of like a sphinx. Sphinx? However you say that. If you like the kindly ones and you want that storyline, this graphic novel I would recommend called The Kindly Ones. This was actually I think I wrote it. Yes, this is like the 9th collection of volumes from the Sandman Tales, all about the kindly ones. This one actually won awards, won the best short fiction for this storyline. And they basically did the story of the Sandman, Morpheus, as a Greek tragedy. And the witches take the place of the Greek chorus. So they're the storytellers. They're telling the tale of Morpheus and his ups and downs and his adventures. Really imaginative, well done, beautiful artwork. Very, very.
Yeah.
It's a very different story. It's not your typical comic book, but it's fun and a good story. Another place that many of these guys show up in is Harry Potter. Book of Magic. Basically, everything that's in Harry Potter came before in Books of Magic. It's like this was done before Harry Potter was a thing. Young kid learns to be a wizard and gets a lot of help from a lot of magical characters in the DCU, including Cain and Abel and Goldie. So if you like Harry Potter, read the original called The Books of Magic.
JK's lawyers are on the phone for you, Largo.
But seriously, when you covered the Shadow, when you covered even just so many of the older things, when we've done these deep dives into them, you realize how much has been.
Oh yeah, it's like that old meme. Simpsons did it. It's like it's probably been in an episode of Simpsons. It's like, yeah, it's probably either been in Marvel or DC or Erie or EC. Somebody's done it before.
Yeah.
At this point in fiction, everything is derivative of something at this point in storytelling.
Pretty much. Now we're into the Chrome Age. Nice. I didn't name these, but
it's called that because of the foil covers that were so popular in the 90s.
Oh man, there were so many.
Yeah.
That's probably true. One of the things that came out of the Chrome Age is Vertigo. So as DC got more and more blatant about ignoring the code and doing mature themes, they decided, well, we want to put all these mature themes somewhere so that poor kids don't just grab a copy off the newsstand and get a shock. So they created Vertigo as basically a way to say, these are for the big kids.
Mm-hmm.
These are not spandex wearing dudes. This is something else. And so many of the stories, like Sandman and some of the other mature themes, migrated over and were put under the Vertigo label.
Almost all of these have been turned into a TV show or movie at some point. And
they're very popular.
To different degrees of success, I would say. The Sandman, I thought was well done. The Constantine movie with Keanu Reeves was, Preacher, I thought was a decent TV show. It wasn't bad. And Why the Last Man, though, I did not enjoy that show.
It was really awful. The comic book is really good. They didn't follow the comic very well, in my opinion.
I did not like that show very much. And Preacher, there were some parts I really liked and some parts that weren't that great. But but it didn't continue. Yeah.
No. And again, this is where DC allowed themselves to experiment. New writers, new artists. If you have an interesting idea that doesn't fit with the superhero stuff, Vertigo is your home. And a lot of cool stuff came out of this. Of course, Sandman, kind of, like I said, he migrates into Vertigo pretty much just, he was already Vertigo before there was Vertigo. He was already doing mature theme stuff. So he shows up there along with Cain and Abel and the whole gang. They even got a little nod in Vertigo as a one-shot called Welcome Back to the House of Mystery. And it was just some of the favorite stories of Neil Gaiman and other writers. They picked what they considered to be the 10 best of House of Mystery and put them together in a collection, and then did some really cool artwork.
Yeah, so, that'd be nice to pick up. Yeah,
if you want a taste of House of Mystery, this is still available as a reprint. It is all just reprints of stories with a new cover, but well worth putting in your library. They did try to do something different. They re-released House of Secrets. No Cain, no host as we knew it. The house is a character in and of itself, and it travels and shows up where it's needed. And the new inhabitants are a group of ghosts or spirits called the Juris. And their whole shtick in this iteration of House of Secrets is they would show up someplace, lure somebody into the house, and then they would judge them because of some secret in their life. And it was cool. It's different, but but they were the judge and jury, and cool stories. Now we're on to the modern age. This is where we live now. This is where everything from 2000 to today is. So, House of Secrets came back for a 2-shot of some interesting painted stories. Weird, but neat. One of the strange oddball places that the House of Secrets popped up during this time was in Infinite Crisis, one of the many crossover events, one of the many crises as DC loves to do. There's a group called the Secret Six. This is not the original. There have been many Secret Six groups. This particular group made their headquarters in the House of Secrets, or a House of Secrets, because apparently there's more than one, or it can pop up in different places. So
they were
it's a
kind of sort of like the Suicide Squad, but not quite.
Yeah,
I did like the series though because it made Catman cool.
That's true.
Previously a kind of goofy villain, but yeah.
And Cheshire, Deadshot, who's kind of came over from Suicide Squad at that point. There were some very interesting oddball characters that were brought together against their will. It's worth a read if you like the Infinite Crisis stories. This was one of the offshoots. There were several in that time period. Then we saw House of Mystery get a revamp again without Kane. No storyteller. The house is the main character, similar to what was going on with House of Secrets. The house would just show up where it was needed. Sometimes it would be a mansion or a haunted house. Sometimes it would show up as a 50s diner. Whatever it needed to be, so it could lure people in and cause them to be judged or frightened or all the above. Some cool stories. Another weird place that the House of Mystery shows up is in the hands of John Constantine. The New 52 did Justice League Dark, which was one of the few things that came out of New 52 I actually liked. I liked the idea of a supernatural version of the League. So you had Deadman, John Constantine, Swamp Thing would pop in there, Etrigan the Demon, Black Orchid, a lot of fun characters, Zatanna. And so John Constantine somehow won the house in a card game with some other mystical types in the DC universe, calls it home, and makes it the headquarters for Justice League Dark. The series eventually wrapped up. Somewhere along the line, Constantine gets kicked out of the Justice League Dark for being a jerk, as he is prone to do. But the house wants him back. So in the final issue, he is called back to the house, and it's made unclear if Constantine is in charge of the house or if the house is in charge of Constantine. It's kind of left up in the air, which is kind of neat.
Yeah.
Like I said, you can't let a good vampire die.
52.
So they brought back I, Vampire, and tried making it an ongoing series as part of the New 52. And it sucked. I didn't like it. I like Andrew Bennett. I did not like this iteration of him. They tried to make him cool and hip and new. And
he looks very
metrosexual.
Yeah.
I gave the New 52 a shot. I bought all 52 first issues, and this one I can't even remember what the storyline was. It left no impression on me whatsoever.
It was forgettable. It was basically a rehash of the original story, but not nearly as well written or drawn, for that matter. So yeah, same point of contention. Andrew and Mary have different ideas. He's a pacifist. He wants to live off of, True Blood or whatever, alternative. Yeah. She wants to go full primeval, and hijinks ensue. Skip it. Just read the original.
And much less clothing than the original, apparently.
Yeah, apparently they don't get cold because, vampires. I don't know. Anything that you slap Sandman on is going to make money. So DC said, hey, let's do some spinoffs. And one of them was The Dreaming, which was actually not terrible. All of the favorite characters from the Sandman stories are highlighted in The Dreaming. So you've got Cain and Abel and all the other hosts show up here, along with trying to remember his name now. Is it Jack Pumpkinhead? Yeah, Pumpkinheaded guys in here. Pretty much anybody from stories or fables, any kind of fictional character you can think of pops into the Dreaming now and then. And they get their own little spotlight show story kind of thing. So worth a look. Not horribly done. Artwork's neat. But again, it was a cash grab. It was, hey, it's something related to Sandman.
Mhm.
So just like this one, House of Whispers. I don't know who asked for this. It's a thing.
Man, they've got a whole neighborhood of houses here. It's like
They do.
a cul-de-sac of
Yeah. So somebody created the House of Whispers. It popped up in the Dreaming. And this one deals more with stories where the host is the Haitian goddess, whose name I cannot pronounce. So these are stories from other types of lore that are less Western influenced. Not bad, just not my thing, but it's out there.
I used to like
And-
the House of Pancakes.
Oh, I love
That
that.
was a good one.
yes, that's a great house.
That one should be definitely, that one should get its own comic. Constantine and the House of Mystery show up in animated form. And this one's one of the better shorts of the DC showcase shorts they did. They did one on Spectre. They did the Losers. They did the Creature Commandos. They did all kinds of them.
All very
and-
well done. And
Yeah.
and impressive. Yeah, I really like
I thought, yeah, some of these were kind of put in as bonuses when you bought one of or you watched one of the larger animated stories. Many of the shorts were better than the story that they come with, I thought.
Yeah,
Better
definitely.
written. And this is kind of an interesting one. I did not like Justice League Dark Apocalypse. I didn't think it was a great story. It was very bleak, but this is kind of comes out of the tail end of that. Constantine pissed off the Spectre and basically the universe because he did some stuff to cause time to get redone in the Flashpoint. So he finds himself in the House of Mystery and he can't leave. And all of his friends keep killing him over and over and over and over, and he can't figure out why. So it is an interesting story. I think it's worth a watch if you like Constantine and gratuitous violence. There's plenty of that in there. And you find out that there's a moral to this story. And whether Constantine actually learns a lesson from this or not, who knows? It's comics or animation for this matter.
Yeah, probably not.
Probably not. No.
Yeah.
Another fun bit. This one is some kid lit that came out. If you've got some younger ones that you want to give them something to read that won't scar them, this is a good one. So Zatanna and the House of Secrets. Zatanna and her dad Zatara are living in the House of Secrets. Hijinks ensue. She has a pet bunny. It's cute, named Pocus. It's cute.
I never knew about this, and now I want to know why Pocus was not in the League of Super Pets.
Right? Totally underrated super
Criminal
pet. Should have been
omission.
there. Indeed.
I'm writing an angry letter right now.
That's right. A sternly written letter is going to DC as we speak. So someone at DC got the bright idea to scrap Vertigo and call it Black Label, like your whiskey. I don't know why. I thought it was dumb, but it's edgy.
Ooh.
So it's basically Vertigo, but now it's called Black Label for some reason. It's a thing. So basically Black Label is reprints and prestige format editions for a higher price tag of comics that you've probably already read. I don't think they are doing some original stuff under Black Label. It is mature audiences. There were some, like a Batman story that they did that was specifically Black Label.
Okay.
I didn't read it, but I heard it was good. So it's a thing. I mention it here because of American Vampire. Another one that came out earlier around the time when Sandman was popular. Fun story. A different take on the vampire legend, and you kind of watch his legacy through time because he's a long-lived character. Interesting thing about this one, written by Scott Snyder, who's a great writer in DC Comics, and Stephen King, among others. So it's neat. If you like vampires, you like cowboys, And yeah, it's a thing. Check it out. Sandman is again being re-released under Black Label. It's the same stories, new covers. But
Okay.
if you missed them the first, second, third, or fourth time they were reprinted,
Yeah.
now you can get them
yeah.
with this cover.
And I see the Netflix little, sticker
Oh, yeah.
on there. Yeah.
Yes,
I've
gotta have that.
Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah. So you knew that was going to happen. That was
Mhm.
definitely a tie-in with the new show, which I'm not knocking. The show is good. Came out in 2022 on Netflix. It
Mhm.
was, what was it, executive produced by Gaiman? He was involved directly.
Mhm.
And it shows because some of the stories are beat for beat right out of the comic books, and they're very well done. There are some changes, but the changes make sense for television,
Yeah.
So very entertaining, good casting. I can't say anything bad about it. I thought it was
And
very, very well done.
Watching it, you'll probably be able to tell which parts were changed and which parts weren't, because all the best parts are probably the ones that were.
Yeah, all the best
faithfully
parts are
adapted.
right from the comic book. The
Yeah.
ones that are questionable, yeah. But one of my favorites was seeing a
Yeah.
live action version of Cain and Abel and Gregory.
Yeah.
Kind of a tear-jerking story that we get there, but it fits with the narrative. And the kindly ones, the witches, show up and are well represented, as well as Goldie. There, you so cute.
Yeah, they did a great
Such
job
a-
with the casting. Yeah,
They
I
did.
think the looks of all the characters fit perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really good. It's worth picking up Netflix again just to watch The Sandman.
Mhm.
That, my friends, is the whole ball of wax. Thank you for going through that with me. As you can
No,
see,
thank you.
things
I've
interconnect a
learned.
lot.
Oh yeah, that's right. In my mind, yeah, the red strings and the pins are all over the place.
It's a long
Yeah.
and winding road.
Yeah.
It hurt my brain to try to put
Mhm.
this into some sort of narrative that made sense. But the Sandman pretty much ties it all together because of his
Yeah,
use of all these
Very
great
well
things.
done. Yeah, and it's just great to
Thanks.
find that he took all of those, like I said, just brought all those things from obscurity and kind of breathed life into them. So I'm grateful for that, and it makes me want to delve down there, pick up some of these back issues and read through them.
So if you see Will just kind of disappear from YouTube for a few months, it's because he's fallen down the
Yes.
rabbit hole. It's easy to do with this stuff.
Someone will come
It's
check on
very,
me,
yep, it's very
Yeah.
interesting, but wow,
scribbling on my
there's a lot.
wall. Yes.
So, Goji, what was some of your favorite horror stuff from DC? Did we miss anything? Did we catch it all?
I think my favorite horror stuff is yet to come, because we've got a lot more to discuss in this series.
That is true.
Mhm.
Speaking of which, I put up a couple more pieces to show some of the other stories we're going to talk about, and you, the viewer, will get to decide which one we do next. Starting
It's
with,
interactive.
it is almost.
Swamp Thing.
Bow, 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 bow. Yeah, loving me some Swamp Thing. He was going to be in this show, but we're already almost at 2 hours. It was too much. So we are going to give him his own show because he's got a ton of stuff to go over. The stories in the comics, the comic related TV show, the animation, the merchandising. There's a lot of swampy stuff.
Yeah, I got to
Mhm.
see some of that Swamp Thing. Oh, Carl, you were there at Second Chance Toys during the Iconicon meetup. They had the Swamp Mobile. They had all of it in a showcase.
Nice.
And it was just really, really cool to check out. I mean, kind of
Mhm.
absurd, but cool.
Oh, yeah. So we'll talk about the Kenner line of Swamp Thing. We'll talk about Swamp Thing and other toy lines, all the different iterations, how he's shown up in cartoons and other media.
Mhm.
I absolutely loved the movie. I know he was like in a rubber suit, and people laugh at it today. But I used to watch anytime that was on. I had it on tape. I would watch it over and over again. I loved that movie. Oh my god,
Yeah.
It was always on HBO, like in the 80s. I don't know. I loved
We'll
it.
definitely revisit that. So if you want Swamp Thing next, let us know in the comments,
Mhm.
please.
Do it.
And
Yeah.
do it. Yeah.
I'm commenting now.
And Will is going to sing the cartoon theme song live
That's
when we
right.
do this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because it's a banger. It should be
It
on the
really
Infinite
is. Jim told me about it, and I was listening to it before we started this show. It is amazing.
Yes.
Oh,
If the
and
copyright,
those are the lyrics.
yeah.
You are amazing.
If the
That's wild.
copyright gods don't strike us down, I might try to play a snippet from it because it's fun.
So good. So good.
So if you want to vote for Swamp Thing, vote for Swamp Thing. Another one we want to do is some of the uncanny investigators. So here is where John Constantine will pop up, as well as Dr. Occult, The Question, Mr. E, who we talked about briefly in this video,
Mhm.
Detective Chimp, who's one of my favorites, as well as Dr. 13, The Ghost Breaker. Not a Ghostbuster,
Ghost.
a Ghost Breaker.
Really?
The
There's a
Elongated
difference.
Man, there is a big difference. And one of the newer ones, which is also a Sandman spinoff, Dead Boy Detectives, which will be getting a Netflix series of their own. Mileage may vary. But in the comics, they were interesting. We'll talk about that. So if you want to see some uncanny investigators, vote for that. Another one I think we should do pretty soon because it's topical are the Weird
Yeah.
Warriors of DC Comics. A lot of war stories. Some of my favorites are here: War That Time Forgot, The Haunted Tank, The Unknown Soldier, G.I. Robot,
Oh, yeah.
Creature Commandos, which is coming soon to a cartoon near you, and The Losers, one of my absolute
Which
favorite
both
teams.
were featured in those DC animated shorts, and
Yes,
well
they were.
done.
Mhm.
Very well done.
Yeah, so they're definitely worth a visit in the Monsters and Misfits series. So you want to see some military hijinks of the Monster and Misfit style, vote for this. Oddballs and
Text
nut jobs.
weird to 11111.
Pretty much.
Standard
there's-
message rate supply.
Oh man, there's no shortage of weird characters in the DC universe. Some of my favorites I've listed here: Plastic Man, of course, Metamorpho, Rack Shade, known as the Changing Man, not to be confused with the other Shade. There's another one. Animal Man, another good one. The Creeper, Ambush Bug, who Toddy Mack is making a figure of as we speak. Ultra, the Multi-Alien, The Weird, which was definitely weird. And Johnny DC, or Johnny DC, depending on which version. If you like your oddballs and nut jobs, vote for this one.
Gotta
These
say
are all
that.
great.
The old
And they're-
Plastic Man cartoon hour, or whatever it was.
Oh,
that used
yeah.
to
We'll
play.
get into all
Plastic
of it.
Man Comedy Adventure Show.
Yeah,
That's
that
it.
was always
With
fun.
Baby Plaz.
Plaz.
Yeah, that was always fun.
So these are your choices again: oddballs and nut jobs,
Yeah.
Weird Warriors, Uncanny Investigators, and whoops,
And-
I hit the wrong button. Swamp Thing.
Yes, every single one of these slides has something that has me intrigued. So it's just a matter of which order we do them, right? Because
Exactly.
do
We're
them
going to do
all.
them all. Yeah, it's just it takes a lot of time to put together all the research, and I have other shows to do between Infinite Playlist and the Retro Nuevo and the many other things I want to get to that I don't have time. Yeah, help me prioritize. So we'll figure out which one we're going to hit next. But that's all we've got for today. Thank you, kind gentlemen, for your time and patience. I know it was a chore at points to see where this is going, but I
Thank you.
promise we're getting somewhere.
You did all the work. We just sat here and commented like,
It's
Pro
not
T
the
Robot
same.
and Tom Servo.
Yeah, I was going to say it's not the same without co-hosts. I hate monologuing, so I appreciate your time.
Tons of great stuff in there. I mean, I'm happy you did all the research because I would have never known if you didn't put this all together for me. So thank you for that. And thank you for
cool.
having me.
Thank you for being had. It's fun. I know Goji is a big fan of Hammer Horror and some of the Marvel monsters and stuff. I was more of a DC guy growing up, so I really enjoyed delving into this. We will definitely delve into some of those others at another point when we have time to put a script together because they're fun. That's what the whole shebang is about with Beasties and Baddies. Any words of wisdom, parting thoughts before we wind up?
Swamp Thing, you are amazing.
I have
he
nothing to
fights
add.
everything.
I think that says it all.
Oh yeah. Have a good night.
So with that, God bless, and read some horror comics and check under your bed to see who's lurking there. We'll see you in the near future.
Good night.